Hello, and welcome to Crime Labs. As always, please like and subscribe to our channel to help us grow a voice for victims. Today, we will be covering the case of Sherri Rasmussen. Sherri was a 29-year-old newlywed and nurse at a local hospital who was found dead in her home by her husband, John Rutan. Sherri and John had been married for 3 months. On February 24, 1986, John came home from work at 5:55 p.m. and immediately felt something was wrong. The garage door was open and Sherri's car was missing. Sherri had called in sick to work that morning, and he found it strange that she would leave ill and not close the garage door. John rushed inside and found Sherri's body among their belongings in the ransacked living room. He immediately called the Los Angeles Police Department to report the incident. Lead homicide detective Lyle Mayer found that burglars could have entered through the front door and began taking items from the home. Detective Mayer thought that one burglar could have been downstairs when another went upstairs and was surprised to find Sherri. Sherri was 6 feet tall and fit, but was no match for the .38 caliber pistol. She left a blood trail down the stairs, which looked like she was trying to escape or make it to the alarm button on their security panel. The assailants were still inside the home and began hitting Sherri with a vase, then shot her again. Sherri was shot a total of 3 times in the chest. The killer then stole her BMW that her husband, John, had just bought her. Detective Mayer noted that many valuables were left untouched in the home, including all of Sherri's jewelry, which was openly left in her room. This was most likely the result of the rushed exit after the gun had been fired. Lloyd Mahaney, a criminalist from the LA County Coroner's Office, arrived around 2 a.m. to examine her body. Approximately 8 hours had passed since her body was first found. He tested for trace evidence like hairs and fibers and collected a sexual assault kit. He noticed a bite mark on Sherri's arm and attempted to recover the saliva left from the bite. He finished at the crime scene several hours later and logged in Sherri's evidence at 10:32 a.m. on February 25, 1986. Possible suspects. The day after Sherri's murder, Sherri's parents came to Los Angeles from Arizona. Sherri's father told police that Sherri had complained a month or two earlier of John's ex-girlfriend and LAPD officer showing up at her work and confronting her. Mayer, the lead detective, notated this in her file but did not follow up on the lead. Sherri's car was found abandoned and contained no further evidence or clues to lead them to Sherri's killer. 2 months after Sherri's murder, a burglary occurred less than 1 mile from Sherri's condo. The victim stated that one of the burglars had a gun, and LAPD named the unidentified burglars as the main suspects in this case. Months passed with no leads until the Los Angeles Times put a story in the newspaper and advertised that the Rasmussens were offering a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the suspects. Detective Mayer described the men as Latino, around 5'4" and 5'6" inches tall. 1986 was a whirlwind year in the world of crime. In 1986, the first recognized case of DNA profiling was used to convict Colin Pitchfork of sexually assaulting and murdering Don Ashworth and Linda Mann, both 15 years old. Alec Jeffries, a geneticist, coined the term genetic fingerprinting and mapped the genomes for both suspects' blood samples as well as semen from both the crime scenes. The genetic work actually exonerated another suspect and eventually led them to Colin Pitchfork, who was sentenced to life imprisonment and released on parole in June 2021. Colin is back in prison as of April 2022 due to a breach of his parole. DNA evidence was still up and coming, and the O.J. Simpson trial in 1994 introduced the public to the ins and outs of DNA. Back in Los Angeles, the LAPD continued looking for Sherri's killers, but the investigation stalled. Sherri's widowed husband and parents were desperately searching for answers, offering to send the samples from the crime scene to a private lab and pay for DNA testing, but the LAPD denied the request. Lyle Mayer, the lead detective for the case, retired, and a new detective took over the case. Sherri's family thought that new eyes on the case could mean answers, but to no avail. The swab of the bite mark on Sherri's arm was in a freezer in the LA County Coroner's Office, awaiting the LAPD to test it for DNA evidence, and it lay in that freezer for many years. In 1998, the FBI launched a DNA database, CODIS, to compare and link DNA samples throughout the nation. In 2000, the state of California provided a $50 million grant to fund DNA testing in unsolved murders. This launched the LAPD's Cold Case Homicide Unit in 2001, pulling files of unsolved murder cases as early as 1899. The unit began focusing on cold cases from 1960 through 1998, a total number of 7,745 cases. Rick Jackson, a detective from the original unit, said in an interview, We looked for sexually motivated murders, where there was a better chance for DNA. We looked at maybe a burglary murder that was unsolved. Because a burglary murder, someone is going to have broken into the place, spent some time there. And an indoor crime scene, obviously, the longer you are there, the more you do. Whether you're sexually assaulting, burglarizing, moving around, ransacking, you increase the chance for good fingerprints. After initially reviewing all of the 7,745 unsolved homicides in LA County from 1960 through 1998, the Cold Case Homicide Unit found 1,400 to have forensic potential to reinvestigate and test evidence. Sherri's case was among these. The Cold Case Homicide Unit solved several cases, including a 1983 murder, 4 murders in the 70s by a serial killer, and in the fall of 2003, they put in a request for DNA analysis on Sherri's case. Due to staffing shortages, it took more than a year for the forensic testing to begin. Jennifer Butterworth, a criminalist in the lab, began working on the analysis in December 2004. She tested a bloody towel and a fingernail, both of which contained only Sherri's DNA. She went to log the results and noticed that the evidence log also contained a bite mark swab, but it wasn't in the evidence provided to her. She notified the coroner's office, who found the evidence about a week later. In 1986, at the crime scene, Lloyd Mahaney sealed the swab into a tube, then sealed the tube in a 5x7-inch envelope. This envelope was no longer intact. It was described in court as ratty and beaten up. There was a tear at one end, with the tube protruding from the envelope, but the tube appeared to be intact according to records. Jennifer Butterworth began the testing of the swab and found a mixture of 2 DNA profiles, one which was Sherri's. The other was tested in CODIS, but did not return a hit. Another interesting piece of information came up in the testing. The DNA gender marker was XX, meaning that the person who bit Sherri was, in fact, a female. Jennifer Butterworth finished typing up her report and sent it back to the Cold Case Unit on February 8, 2005. No further information was provided, and Sherri's case was once again shelved in the Cold Case Unit. In February 2009, Sherri's case came back on the table as the Cold Case Unit looked through old files. Jim Nuttall, Cold Case Detective, said he opened Sherri's case, read the 2005 lab analysis report, and that her case jumped off the page at him because it was obvious that the original burglary theory with 2 men couldn't be true. Nuttall went through the case thoroughly and came up with 5 possible suspects, one of them being Stephanie Lazarus, John's ex-girlfriend. Stephanie's name had P.O. next to it in the file, which Nuttall questioned. After speaking with John, he realized it meant police officer. Nuttall was stunned, mulling over the possibility that one of their own was a suspect in a murder. The 5 suspects were numbered in a file, 1 through 5, Stephanie Lazarus being least likely at number 5. Stephanie's status as a suspect was kept top secret in the department as the investigation continued, but they couldn't rule her out as a suspect. 3 of the other suspects were ruled out, leaving suspects 1 and 2 in the case, one being Stephanie Lazarus and the other being a nurse who worked with Sherri at the hospital. They decided to investigate the nurse first, who was living in Northern California. The Cold Case Unit contacted the local police there, and they collected a DNA sample on her without her knowledge, most likely collecting a cup she had drank from or a cigarette butt. This sample came back negative in mid-April, leaving Stephanie Lazarus as the only remaining suspect. They started digging into her background. In the meantime, Nuttall called Sherri's father, Nels Rasmussen, and asked him to walk through everything A to Z. Nels insisted once more that they needed to look into Stephanie Lazarus. Nuttall reportedly told Nels, "Give me time to do what I have to do, and I think I'll be able to have an answer for you." Stephanie Lazarus and John Rutan began dating after graduating UCLA in the early 80s. They reportedly dated on and off until John met Sherri and began dating her seriously in 1985. He proposed to her in the summer of '85, they married in November, and she was dead by February 1986. At that time, Stephanie Lazarus was a 26-year-old patrol officer in her 3rd year with LAPD. She married in 1996 and adopted a little girl. She never, in her long career with the LAPD, had an incident or been accused of misconduct. As detectives continued digging into her case, the details fell into place perfectly. Sherri was shot by a .38 caliber weapon, which was the same weapon used by LAPD as off-duty or backup weapons. Detectives entered Lazarus' name into the California State Gun Registry, which returned a list of all the firearms she had ever registered. One of them, a .38, had been reported stolen on March 9, 1986, 13 days after the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. Stephanie Lazarus reported the theft by walking into the Santa Monica Police Department. She told the clerk that she left her car parked near Santa Monica Pier and returned to find the driver's side lock punched out. She said her blue gym bag had been stolen from the vehicle, reportedly containing her Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, clothes, and cassette tapes. Nuttall knew that a DNA sample would need to be collected from Stephanie in order to pursue her as a suspect, but the fears of tipping her off, tarnishing her name if she was innocent, and stirring trouble within the hierarchy of the LAPD racked their nerves. For 8 days in May of 2009, plainclothes detectives trailed Lazarus and finally collected her DNA from a cup and straw which they saw her drink from. The Scientific Investigation Division rapidly tested her DNA and 2 days later called Robert Bubb to tell him it's a match. They decided it was best to pass the case on to the Robbery Homicide Division, who handles the most sensitive and high-profile cases. Robert Bubb was a veteran of the Robbery Homicide Division and decided to take the case to their office, just across the hall from Stephanie Lazarus's current office in the art theft detail. Bubb dropped off the 4 binders, briefed the detectives on the secrecy of the case, then went to the DA's office to warn the prosecutors the details of what was to come. Detectives were careful in how they confronted Lazarus. They didn't want to issue a search warrant when she was home. They didn't want anyone approaching her if she had a gun or access to a gun. They decided to stage the interview at the Parker Center's jail division, 1 floor down from her office. Firearms weren't allowed in the jail, so they would be surrendering their guns before entering. They were to tell Lazarus that they needed help interviewing a suspect in jail who had information on an art theft case, then once in the interrogation room, shift subjects to Sherri Rasmussen. Natal called Nels Rasmussen, Sherri's father, and asked if he could meet with them the morning of June 5th. He wanted to be there in person when Stephanie Lazarus's arrest took place. Nels said he had a doctor's appointment, and Natal replied, "You may want to reschedule." Before 7 a.m. on June 5th, Stephanie was told she was needed in the jail to interview a suspect in the jail for a stolen art case. When she arrived in the interrogation room, they told her that her name came up in a case involving her ex-boyfriend, John Rutan, and they brought her there where they could speak privately, away from their colleagues. For 68 minutes, they discussed the murder of Sherri Rasmussen until they asked Lazarus for a voluntary DNA swab. She said she wanted to contact a lawyer, got up, and walked out of the room. She got to the jail hallway, where robbery homicide detectives placed her in handcuffs. She was held on a $10 million bail in the Los Angeles County Jail and was subsequently found guilty of first-degree murder of Sherri Rasmussen and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. She was 52 years old at the time of her sentencing and will be eligible for parole in 2034. In 2010, the Rasmussen family filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles, the LAPD, John Rutan, and Stephanie Lazarus. They alleged that the LAPD was hostile toward them, negligent in record-keeping, allowed Stephanie Lazarus to periodically review the file, and many other allegations that delayed the resolution of their daughter's murder case, causing them emotional distress. The case went through many judicial avenues, but eventually was dismissed, and the California Supreme Court refused to hear the case in March of 2013. Stephanie Lazarus made an appeal of great length in May of 2013. In June 2015, 3 judges dismissed the case, and the California Supreme Court declined to hear her case. Sherri Rasmussen would be 65 as of the posting of this video, but she's forever 29 in the hearts and minds of her family and loved ones. Let's hold a moment of silence for Sherri Rasmussen. Thanks for watching Crime Labs on YouTube. Please click here to watch our other videos.